The chandeliers of Ravenscourt Hall burned like captured constellations, their light rippling over gilt mirrors and polished marble, as if the heavens themselves were mocking the spectacle below. The Duke's wedding ball was the triumph of the season. Every noble house in London had arrived to witness the taming of Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Ravenscroft, a man known for his solitude, severity, and rumored incapacity for tenderness. Yet tonight he stood beside his bride, Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, whose beauty was of that quiet sort which gentles rather than dazzles. Her gown, the palest silver, shimmered with threads of moonlight, and her smile, hesitant, sincere, seemed to belong to another world entirely. For a time, the night belonged to them. Music floated through the air, violins tracing delicate arcs above the murmur of conversation. Ladies watched from behind their fans as the new duchess moved through the crowd with grace born not of arrogance, but composure, the kind that only those who have known loneliness can possess. Yet beneath her serenity lay a tremor, an intuition, a chill, something unspoken in her husband's distant gaze. He had not yet looked at her as a man looks at his wife. He had touched her hand, offered his arm, but his eyes lingered elsewhere, searching as though the night itself might betray him. When he smiled, it was not warmth but performance. When he spoke, his words fell with the careful restraint of one balancing between duty and disdain. It was near midnight when the whisper began. No one remembered its source, perhaps a jealous debutante, perhaps an envious cousin, but it spread with the swiftness of perfume on silk. She married him for her father's inheritance. The phrase passed from lip to lip, refined and reshaped, until it reached the very ears it sought to wound. By the time it reached Adrian, it had gathered the weight of conviction. The Duke froze mid-conversation. His expression, already guarded, hardened into something marble and motionless. When he turned his gaze upon his bride, the air around them seemed to shiver. Eleanor, unaware of the storm, approached him with that tender eagerness only newlyweds possess, her hands clasped lightly at her waist. "Adrian," she said softly, "they are asking for us to dance again. Would you?" He extended his hand halfway. Then, before all of London's glittering eyes, he let it fall. The gesture was slight, but silence rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. The orchestra faltered. The duchess's hand, suspended in air, trembled before she withdrew it with aching composure. "Forgive me," he said, voice low but cutting. "I find the heat oppressive." He turned away. She curtsied faintly, as though bowing to the ruin of her own happiness, and the room, sensing blood, resumed its rhythm with cruel enthusiasm. The violins began again, but no melody could soften what had just been witnessed. Eleanor retreated to the terrace, where the cool night wrapped her in indifference. The gardens below glistened with dew, and the scent of roses, so sweet only hours ago, now cloyed her throat. She pressed her palm against her heart, as if to still its humiliation. Behind her, the laughter of the ballroom rolled like distant thunder. When Adrian joined her, the moonlight cast him in silver and shadow, his jaw rigid, his breath unsteady. "You might have told me," he said quietly. She turned. "Told you what, my lord?" "That your father's estate is to pass to you upon his death. That your dowry exceeds even the rumors. That your devotion may not have been as selfless as you led me to believe." Her eyes, wide and glistening, searched his face as though she might still find mercy there. "If you think me capable of such deceit, then I have failed you already." He did not answer. The silence between them expanded, dense and suffocating. From the ballroom, a waltz began anew, a cruel reminder of the world they once imagined shared. At last he said, "I cannot abide falsehood in my house." "Then you must teach me how to live without truth in mine," she whispered. The words stung him, though he did not show it. He turned his gaze toward the gardens, the fountains glimmering like pale ghosts beneath the moon. "Tomorrow you will travel to Ravenscroft by the sea. The air, there is said to cure all manner of delicacy." She understood. Exile, dressed in courtesy. He bowed, a gesture as formal as a stranger's, and returned inside. the doors closed, and the music swallowed him whole. Eleanor remained where she was until the night blurred at its edges. Her tears, withheld through the cruel ordeal, now fell in quiet rebellion. A breeze lifted her veil, carrying it across the terrace like a wounded bird. She did not chase it. In the hours that followed, the servants whispered as they packed her trunks. Her lady's maid, timid and loyal, dared ask if the Duchess wished to write to his grace before leaving. Eleanor shook her head. What is there to say that he would believe? The maid said nothing more. Dawn found her in the carriage, pale and still as carved alabaster. The city, once her world, receded behind a veil of fog and rain. Hooves struck the cobblestones with a steady rhythm, like a dirge for love untried. Through the window she glimpsed the spires of St. Clement's, the river curling like smoke, the awakening streets of London, all indifferent witnesses to her fall. As they crossed Westminster Bridge, she pressed a handkerchief to her lips, stifling the sob that threatened to undo her composure. Pride, that final armor of the wounded, kept her upright. Yet, as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, her thoughts turned inward, not to anger, but bewilderment. How fragile was trust, that a single whisper could shatter it. How cruel was affection, that it demanded proof in the currency of pain. Behind her at Ravenscourt Hall, the Duke stood at a window overlooking the empty drive. The remnants of the ball lay scattered, petals trampled beneath silk slippers, champagne dulled to tears on crystal. He could still hear the echo of her voice, that simple "Would you dance?" which now struck him as unbearable innocence. In the hearth beside him lay the discarded remains of a letter he had once meant to give her, his confession that he had loved her long before their vows, that her gentleness had undone him in ways battle never could. It had seemed too sentimental then. Now it was ash. Outside, the rain thickened, tracing rivulets down the glass like veins of regret. He told himself she would be comfortable in Cornwall, that distance would bring clarity, that reputation demanded restraint. Yet none of these lies could quiet the echo of her voice on the terrace, soft and trembling. Then you must teach me how to live without truth in mine. By nightfall, her carriage had vanished into the countryside, the road glistening like a blade beneath the storm. And so began her exile, not of miles but of the heart. The sea at Ravenscroft by the Sea was a restless creature, endless, gray, and never still. It hurled itself against the cliffs as though furious to be confined, and in that eternal motion, Eleanor found a mirror for her own heart. The manor itself stood at the edge of that wilderness, its windows staring blankly toward the horizon, its corridors whispering of lives paused rather than lived. Here, the new Duchess of Ravenscroft, each morning she rose before the servants stirred, wrapped in a shawl of faded rose silk, the only color she permitted herself, and walked the cliff path until the hem of her gown was heavy with mist. The wind tore at her veil, the sea foam touched her shoes, and still she walked, as if distance could quiet the ache beneath her ribs. She wrote each day, too, at the escritoire by the window overlooking the tide. Her pen trembled not from cold, but restraint. For every word she wrote was addressed to the man who had exiled her. My dearest, one began, I dreamt last night you called my name, but when I turned there was only the sea. Another, if you meant to teach me silence, you have succeeded. And yet another, written after a storm had shattered half the garden glass, the wind broke your portrait from the wall tonight. I could not bring myself to hang it again. But she never sent them. Each letter was folded, sealed, and placed in a small oak chest by her bedside, her heart's unburied grave. London, meanwhile, thrummed with the season's cruelties. The Duke returned to the city with a face carved in propriety, hosting dinners and attending Parliament as though untouched by scandal. Yet beneath the veneer, unease stalked him. The rumor had not died, it had merely evolved. Now, they said his Duchess lived in comfort on the coast with a painter, a widower, handsome, penniless, and fond to see air. The Duke dismissed it at first. But pride is a poor physician. It cures nothing and inflames all wounds. By the time his steward mentioned that the Duchess had sat for a small portrait by a local artist, Adrian's silence turned to ice. He sent a letter, formal, brief. Your Grace, it has reached my attention that you have engaged in unnecessary acquaintanceship. I request the return of the wedding locket presented to you on our union as a matter of family propriety. Ravenscroft. No, Eleanor. No warmth. Only the weight of suspicion pressed into ink. When the letter arrived, Eleanor read it twice, the words blurring as tears welled unbidden. She took the locket from her neck, the delicate oval of gold that held his likeness and a pressed violet from their wedding bouquet, and held it in her palm. It was all she possessed that had not turned against her. Her maid, Martha, entered softly. "Shall I prepare a parcel for his Grace, ma'am?" Eleanor closed her hand around the locket. "No." Martha hesitated. "If I may, it might ease—" "Do you think it eases anything to surrender what love once touched?" Her voice broke, then steadied. "Tell the messenger he may return empty-handed." When the servant rode away, the locket still lay warm against her skin, and guilt mingled with defiance. That night, she wrote again. "You ask for what was never yours to doubt. The locket was a promise, not a possession. I keep it not from pride, but from memory." She sealed the page, then stared at it for a long while before adding it to the growing pile of unsent letters. Days turned to weeks. The autumn storms came, sheets of rain lashing the coast, thunder rolling like judgment from the heavens. Eleanor took to the library during those tempests, lighting only one candle, its flame trembling as if reluctant to bear witness. There she read aloud to herself, filling the silence with borrowed words. Tennyson, Shelley, the Psalms. But no verse could drown the echo of her husband's cold command. One evening, as she closed a book, she heard the faint knock of carriage wheels on the gravel outside. Few traveled to Ravenscroft unbidden. Her heart leapt, a foolish reflex, and she rose swiftly. But when she opened the door, it was not the Duke. A courier, drenched and weary, stood beneath the archway. He held a letter sealed in black wax. Eleanor took it with trembling fingers, breaking the seal to reveal her father's handwriting, weak, wandering. He was ill, perhaps dying, and had written to say only, "I wish to see you once more before the frost comes." The paper fell from her hand. In that instant, all her pride, the armor she had worn since that dreadful night, melted into grief. The room blurred. Her breath came shallow. How small her quarrel seemed beside mortality. She spent the next day arranging her journey. Yet, even as she prepared to leave, her thoughts turned to Adrian. Would he come to her father's bedside? Would he even care to know? She almost wrote to him, almost, but the words died before they reached the page. Instead, she opened the chest of letters. The air was thick with the scent of dried violets and old wax. She lifted one letter at random, opened it, and read, "If ever you doubt me, look to the sea. It keeps no secrets, yet forgives every storm." She smiled faintly, bitterly, then carried the entire bundle to the fireplace. One by one, she fed them to the flames. The paper curled, darkened, vanished. Smoke drifted upward, veiling her tears. The last letter she hesitated, over, the one she had written after receiving his demand for the locket. Her thumb traced the crease, her heart catching on its edges. Then, with a sigh that seemed to empty her soul, she dropped it into the fire. The wax cracked, the ink bled, the words turned to ash. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. The sea roared below the cliffs, furious and unrelenting. She drew her shawl tighter and whispered into the storm, "You may take the rest of me, but not my memory." Far away in London, Adrian stood in his study, staring into his own fire. Before him lay a report from his steward, confirming what gossip had long implied. "The Duchess has refused your command." Beneath it, a small charcoal sketch of her profile, the artist's rendering, captured her with downcast eyes and a half-smile that seemed both sorrowful and proud. He tore the sketch in half, though his hands shook. For the first time, anger failed to shield him. He imagined her at the window of that cold manor, the sea behind her, the wind in her hair, and something within him fractured. The locket, he realized, had been more than a trinket. It had been a tether, and by demanding it back, he had severed the last thread between them. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the glass. He turned from the fire, unable to watch the ashes any longer. She, on the cliffs of Cornwall, lifted her face to that same rain, eyes closed, lips parted, not in surrender, but in weary defiance. Neither knew that the other, at that same moment, whispered the same word into the storm. Forgive. The rain began at dusk, a slow, deliberate fall that seemed to mourn with the earth. By the time the carriage reached Ravenscroft Manor, the path was a river of mud, and the horses' breath steamed like ghosts in the night. Inside, the Duke of Ravenscroft sat rigid, his gloved hands clenched upon his knees, his thoughts circling the same unending torment. Weeks had passed since he had received news of her father's illness and of her silence. No reply, no request, no summons. Only absence. And absence, he had learned, was louder than accusation. When at last the carriage halted before the manor, lightning split the sky, illuminating the stone facade. Cold, grand, indifferent. He stepped out without assistance, the rain striking his face with the shock of truth. Every step toward the door felt both penance and defiance. Within, the hall was dimly lit, the air fragrant with peat smoke and sea damp. A maid, startled at his appearance, curtsied and fled to announce him. He stood alone, drenched, his coat dripping onto the marble floor. The silence pressed against him until he heard the faint sound of footsteps descending the staircase. Eleanor appeared at the landing, a single candle in her hand. Its flame trembled, as though unsure whether to burn or yield. She looked thinner than he remembered, though not fragile, rather distilled. Suffering had refined her beauty into something quieter, untouchable. "My lord," she said, her voice soft yet steady, "I had not expected—" "Nor I," he interrupted, "but your silence has become unbearable." She descended slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Silence is a lesson you first taught me." The words struck him harder than the storm outside. For a moment neither moved. The fire in the drawing room crackled faintly, and the scent of rain filled the air between them. "I came," he began, his tone restrained, "to ask, no, to understand. You knew your father was dying. You wrote not a line, not even to request my presence at his side. I thought you would come without being asked." Her reply was so simple, it wounded him. He looked away, jaw tight. "Perhaps I no longer presumed to know what you desired." Lightning flashed again, whitening the room. Eleanor turned from him and set the candle upon the mantel. Desire is a dangerous presumption in a house that knows only duty. The Duke's composure cracked. "Is this to be our exchange? Parables and reproaches?" "Then you prefer silence," she said, facing him now, eyes glistening. "Very well. It has kept us married in name, if nothing else." He took a step toward her, his voice lowering. "You mistake me, Eleanor. I did not come to quarrel." "Then why are you here?" "To see if you still wear it." She froze. Slowly she reached to her throat, drawing forth the gold locket. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, unbroken, untarnished. "I have not removed it since the day you gave it," she said. He exhaled, half relief, half remorse. "Then I owe you more than silence." Her expression softened, though caution lingered in her eyes. "And what, my lord, do you owe me?" "The truth." She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Then tell it." He turned from her, staring into the fire as though the confession might emerge there. "When I heard the rumor of your acquaintance with that painter, I believed it. Not because I thought you faithless, but because I could not imagine being worthy of faith." Eleanor's breath caught. "You believed the worst of me, because you believed the worst of yourself." He nodded, barely. "My pride has always been the mask of my cowardice. I feared that loving you would unmake me. And it did." She stepped closer. "Then why exile me for it?" "Because," he whispered, "I mistook love's ache for humiliation, and I thought distance might cure it." Her eyes filled. "And did it?" He turned, rain still glistening in his hair, his gaze stripped of all defense. "No, it only taught me the size of my mistake. For a moment, the world contracted to the space between them, the ticking clock, the low hum of the fire, the rain's rhythm against glass. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice trembling yet resolute. "You ask for the truth. Shall I give mine?" He nodded. "The rumor that ruined me," she said, "began not in London but in my own family. My cousin Philip, he who manages my father's affairs, was the source. He sought to inherit what my marriage denied him. He whispered to those who would carry his venom where it would wound most swiftly." The Duke stiffened. "You are certain?" "I confronted him before I left the city. He did not deny it." Adrian closed his eyes. "God forgive me." She looked at him, at the proud man now unraveling before her, and her anger dissolved into something deeper, quieter, far more dangerous. Pity. "It was not gossip that exiled me, Adrian. It was your doubt." He took her hand then, unloved and trembling. The gesture was cautious, reverent, as if touching something sacred. "I would undo every mile between us if I could." "You cannot," she said gently, "but you may learn to walk them differently." The clock struck 9. Its echo lingered, soft as forgiveness, yet heavy as consequence. He bowed his head, his forehead nearly brushing her knuckles. "If I ask you to return to London, would you? Would I return as your wife or your penance?" He looked up, meeting her gaze. "As the only truth I have left." For a heartbeat, she seemed ready to yield, to let years of silence break into tenderness, but then thunder roared, shaking the windows, and she pulled her hand away. "Not yet," she said. "Love cannot bloom where trust lies buried." He swallowed hard, nodding once. "Then I shall wait." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the panes like desperate hands. He turned toward the window, watching it streak down the glass, and spoke without looking at her. "Do you remember the night of our wedding? I remember you would not dance with me." "I remember that too," he murmured. "It is the only regret that has followed me through every room since." She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing her cheek. "Then let it follow you until it teaches you grace." He turned back to her, lips parting as though to speak again, but the candle flickered, guttered, and died, leaving only the firelight between them. The air trembled with what neither dared to say. When she finally spoke, her voice was scarcely more than breath. "You may stay the night, if you wish. The storm is cruel." He hesitated, then bowed deeply, the humility of a man who had forgotten how to kneel. "Cruelty, I think, is mercy compared to what I deserve." As he withdrew toward the door, she watched him go, her hand still tingling from his touch. The wind howled through the corridors, rattling every shutter as if the house itself sighed. And when the door closed behind him, Eleanor pressed the locket to her heart and whispered, "If he truly means to wait, then God grant him the courage to keep his promise." London awoke to whispers. They traveled along cobblestone streets, through carriage windows and tea parlors, carried on fans and folded letters. The Duke of Ravenscroft is to host a ball. The announcement itself was no surprise. London lived upon spectacle, but the cause was unclear. Some said it was to mark the reopening of his ancestral home after years of shadowed mourning. Others murmured of stranger motives, repentance perhaps, or madness disguised as nobility. Whatever the truth, by the time the night arrived, Ravenscourt Hall stood illuminated once more. The same chandeliers that had witnessed humiliation now burned with renewed brilliance. The ballroom gleamed, awash in gold and ivory, the air alive with perfume and anticipation. It was said no invitation had been refused, not when scandal itself might attend. At the center of it all stood the Duke, severe and still, dressed in black that gleamed like obsidian. His face, once proud to the point of cruelty, now bore the pallor of a man long at war with himself. The guests watched him with careful fascination. Even gossip faltered before the tension that clung to him like mist. He had returned to London not to reclaim power, but to surrender pride. Adrian moved through the throng with a precision that was almost ceremonial. He spoke little, bowed formally, and declined every dance. Yet beneath his calm exterior ran the tremor of purpose. For weeks he had planned this evening, shaping it not as celebration but confession. He had written letters to every noble house that had once whispered against his wife. He had commissioned a portrait of Eleanor, not from a painter of renown, but from the very artist whom rumor had accused her of knowing too intimately. It now hung in the heart of the ballroom, veiled by silk. At the appointed hour, the orchestra fell silent. The Duke mounted the dais, the echo of his boots punctuating the hush that spread like frost. "My friends," he began, though there was little friendship in the room, "you have honored my house tonight with your presence. It is fitting, perhaps, that those who witnessed its fall should also witness its penance." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. He continued, voice measured but resolute. "I have wronged a woman who bore my name and my trust. I listened to lies when I should have listened to her. And in doing so, I became the very man I most despised, one ruled not by truth but by pride." Murmurs broke out, quickly stifled. The Duke raised a hand. "You remember the night of our wedding, how rumor painted her motives in greed. I believed it. I condemned her in silence, and I called that silence dignity. It was cowardice." His gaze swept the room. Every pair of eyes, once sharp with judgment, now avoided his. "I have spent months attempting to erase what my folly has written in her heart. Tonight I will not erase, it cannot be done, but I will name the truth." He turned toward the veiled portrait. With one motion he drew back the silk. Gasps echoed. Eleanor's likeness glowed beneath candlelight, not idealized, not adorned, but achingly real. The artist had captured her seated by the sea, wind in her hair, eyes turned towards some unseen horizon, resolute, wounded, luminous. Beneath the portrait, engraved in small letters, were the words, "To she who loved me despite myself." The Duke spoke again, quieter now. "I once demanded she return the locket that bound us. She refused, and in that refusal, she proved more faithful than I, who had vowed eternity. I can no longer ask forgiveness in private. I have forfeited the right to secrecy. I can only give what remains of me, publicly, humbly." He paused, breath unsteady. "If she is listening tonight, let her know that the man she married has died, and the one who stands before you was born of her mercy." The room was utterly still. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. And then, the soft sound of a door opening. Heads turned. From the far end of the ballroom, a woman stepped through the threshold, cloaked in twilight blue. No announcement, no escort. She moved as one accustomed to whispers and immune to them. Eleanor. Conversation dissolved into silence, all mingled with disbelief. Her presence was impossible, yet undeniable. Her gaze found us at once, and the world, the crowd, the music, the years, collapsed to a single trembling moment. Adrian descended from the dais, each step measured, reverent. When he reached her, he bowed, not the perfunctory nod of nobility, but a bow of apology, of surrender. "My lady," he said, voice raw, "I have waited to earn the right to call you by your name again." "You needed no right," she answered softly, "only remembrance." The murmur that swept through the ballroom was like the wind through autumn leaves, restless, uncertain. Yet neither of them heard it. "I wronged you," he said, "before all who matter and all who never did. And I have no words left to defend myself." "Then use none," she said, eyes glistening. "Truth does not need witnesses, it needs courage." He looked up at her, a faint smile trembling at the edges of his restraint. "Then let me prove mine." And before London's stunned elite, the Duke of Ravenscroft, whose pride had once been legend, fell to one knee. Gasps rippled through the hall. No duke knelt before his wife, no man humbled himself before rumor. Yet here he was, unguarded, rain-soaked from his arrival, eyes fixed upon her as though awaiting sentence. "Eleanor," he said, voice breaking, "forgive me, not for what the world has seen, but for what I made you endure unseen. If I could rewrite every moment since our wedding, I would trade all titles, all lands for the sound of your laughter once more." Tears shone at the corners of her eyes. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, tracing the line where rain met regret. "You have always known how to speak, Adrian. Now learn how to listen. He rose slowly, her hand still resting against his face. For a moment, the ballroom ceased to exist. It was only them, two souls bruised by pride, tempered by sorrow, standing beneath the same fragile mercy. Then, with quiet dignity, she turned to the assembled crowd. Let those who once doubted me hear this. I require no vindication. Love once broken is not mended by applause, but by understanding. Her words fell like silk upon stone, soft yet unyielding. She looked back at Adrian, her expression unreadable. You have offered your truth before all. I accept it, but forgiveness is not given, it is earned. A single violin resumed playing, hesitant at first, then fuller, as if the very house exhaled. The guests, uncertain of propriety, began to bow their heads. Adrian extended his hand, not commanding, not pleading, simply offering. Eleanor hesitated, then placed her fingers in his. Together they stood before the portrait, two figures bound by what had been broken and what might yet be restored. And though the music swelled and the crowd resumed its murmur, the air between them carried only one promise, unspoken yet absolute. He would prove himself, not by words, but by every act that followed. Outside, the first drops of rain struck the window panes, soft and insistent. It was as if the heavens themselves had chosen to bear witness. The rain began before dawn, soft at first, then relentless. By noon, London's skies had turned to pewter, and the sound of carriage wheels sloshing through the streets echoed like distant heartbeats. Inside one such carriage sat the Duke of Ravenscroft, hands clasped tight around a single sealed letter. He had written it the night before, his final attempt should all else fail. He had not seen Eleanor since the night of his repentance. She had left the ballroom without a word more, her hand slipping from his with the same grace that had once undone him entirely. For 3 days he had sent no message. To pursue too soon would make his confession seem performance. To wait too long would turn remorse into cowardice. But time, cruel as ever, had made his choice for him. That morning, word had reached him, Eleanor was leaving London. A carriage bound for her late aunt's estate in Devon had been seen at the gates of her modest townhouse. No escort, no announcement, just departure. The Duke gave the order to ready his horses at once. Now, through the downpour, he could just make out the outline of another carriage ahead, a dark silhouette against the gray horizon. His driver strained to keep pace as the wheels cut through the mud, but Adrian leaned forward, urgency threading through his every breath. Faster, he commanded, his voice breaking against the storm. As they drew nearer, he saw her. Through the misted window, Eleanor sat still as marble, her gloved hands folded in her lap, gaze lost to the rain-smeared countryside. The sight of her, composed even in farewell, struck him with unbearable tenderness. He had once mistaken that poise for pride. Now he understood it as her armor. He called out her name, but the storm devoured his voice. Desperation surged. He signaled his driver, an impulsive, reckless gesture, and moments later his carriage lurched forward, pulling alongside hers. The wheels splashed dangerously close, horses neighed, frightened by proximity. "Stop!" he cried. Half out the door, his coat soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Eleanor, please, I beg you, stop." Her coachman pulled the reins, the carriage jerking to a halt upon the muddy lane. For a moment, all was soundless, but for the hiss of rain. Then the door opened, and Eleanor stepped down. The world seemed to hold its breath. She wore a traveling cloak of deep green, its hem already heavy with rain, and beneath her hood her face was pale, but resolute. "You should not have followed me," she said, her voice steady against the wind. "I could not do otherwise," he replied. "You cannot leave me with silence again. Not now, not when truth has barely drawn its first breath between us." She regarded him quietly. "Truth is not enough, Adrian. You think one night of humility can cleanse what years of pride destroyed. No," he admitted, stepping closer. "But perhaps one lifetime of devotion might begin to mend it." Her lips trembled, not with tears, but restraint. "You speak of devotion as though it were a promise you have not already broken. I broke faith with my heart, not with you, he said, and I have lived every hour since as punishment for it. Lightning cracked above them, illuminating the road in silver fire. Rain drummed harder, soaking through his coat until it clung to him like penance. Yet he did not move, nor wipe the water from his face. His gaze was fixed upon her, unblinking, desperate. I wronged you before the world, he continued. Let me make amends before it now. I do not ask forgiveness, I ask for the chance to deserve it. She closed her eyes briefly, rain tracing her lashes. And what if I cannot believe you? What if I am too tired to begin again? He reached into his coat and drew out the letter, its edges dampened, the seal nearly broken. Then take this. It is everything I could not say if you turned away, but I would rather burn it unread than see you vanish into that horizon without hearing me once more. For the first time, her composure faltered. Why now? She whispered. After everything, why fight for me now? Because, he said, voice low but unwavering, the man who exiled you was a duke. The man who loves you is only a man. Silence fell. The wind stilled as if to listen. Rain streamed down the folds of her cloak, glimmering like tears she would not show. Eleanor took a step forward. And if I said no, if I chose peace over the storm of us, would you let me go? He swallowed, his throat raw. If peace means a life without you, then I would rather drown in the storm. A single laugh escaped her. Half sob, half surrender. You always were impossible, she murmured. Then be impossible with me, he answered, a faint, trembling smile touching his lips. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then her hand rose, trembling, to his face. Her touch was gentle, tentative, as though testing the reality of his change. You truly mean to follow through, she said softly, until my last breath. She drew in a shuddered breath, her resolve dissolving into the rhythm of the rain. Then let us not live by apology, Adrian, she whispered. Let us live by love. He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. The moment hung suspended, the world narrowing to rain and breath, and forgiveness long denied. When she looked up again, there was no anger, only exhausted tenderness. Together they turned toward the carriage, theirs now, not his or hers. As they climbed inside, the storm outside did not lessen, but its sound became something else entirely. Not fury, but absolution. As the horses pulled away, their silhouettes vanished into the rain. The road behind them filled with water, washing away the tracks of both their carriages, two paths, now indistinguishable. And for the first time in years, the Duke of Ravenscroft smiled, not with pride, but with peace. The rain kept falling, endless, cleansing, merciful. And somewhere beneath its unbroken